Chapter 8. A few days after this, Eugène called at Madame de Restaud's house. She was not at home. 3 times he tried the experiment, and 3 times he found her doors closed against him, though he was careful to choose an hour when Monsieur de Trailles was not there. The Vicomtesse was right. The student studied no longer. He put in an appearance at lectures simply to answer to his name, and after thus attesting his presence, departed forthwith. He had been through a reasoning process familiar to most students. He had seen the advisability of deferring his studies to the last moment before going up for his examinations. He made up his mind to cram his 2nd and 3rd year's work into the 3rd year, when he meant to begin to work in earnest, and to complete his studies in law with one great effort. In the meantime, he had 15 months in which to navigate the ocean of Paris, to spread the nets and set the lines that would bring him a protectress and a fortune. Twice during that week he saw Madame de Beauséant. He did not go to her house until he had seen the Marquis d'Ajuda drive away. Victory for yet a few more days was with the great lady, the most poetic figure in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, and the marriage of the Marquis d'Ajuda Pinto with Mademoiselle de Rochefide was postponed. The dread of losing her happiness filled those days with a fever of joy unknown before, but the end was only so much the nearer. The Marquis d'Ajuda and the Rochefides agreed that this quarrel and reconciliation was a very fortunate thing. Madame de Beauséant, so they hoped, would gradually become reconciled to the idea of the marriage, and in the end would be brought to sacrifice d'Ajuda's morning visits to the exigencies of a man's career, exigencies which she must have foreseen. In spite of the most solemn promises, daily renewed, Monsieur d'Ajuda was playing a part, and the Vicomtesse was eager to be deceived. Instead of taking a leap heroically from the window, she is falling headlong down the staircase, said her most intimate friend, the Duchesse de Langeais. Yet this afterglow of happiness lasted long enough for the Vicomtesse to be of service to her young cousin. She had a half superstitious affection for him. Eugène had shown her sympathy and devotion at a crisis when a woman sees no pity, no real comfort in any eyes. When if a man is ready with soothing flatteries, it is because he has an interested motive. Rastignac made up his mind that he must learn the whole of Goriot's previous history. He would come to his bearings before attempting to board the Maison de Nucingen. The results of his inquiries may be given briefly as follows. In the days before the Revolution, Jean-Joachim Goriot was simply a workman in the employ of a vermicelli maker. He was a skilful, thrifty workman, sufficiently enterprising to buy his master's business when the latter fell a chance victim to the disturbances of 1789. Goriot established himself in the Rue de la Jussienne, close to the Corn Exchange. His plain good sense led him to accept the position of president of the section, so as to secure for his business the protection of those in power at that dangerous epoch. This prudent step had led to success. The foundations of his fortune were laid in the time of the scarcity, real or artificial, when the price of grain of all kinds rose enormously in Paris. People used to fight for bread at the bakers' doors, while other persons went to the grocers' shops and bought Italian paste foods without brawling over it. It was during this year that Goriot made the money, which at a later time was to give him all the advantage of the great capitalist over the small buyer. He had, moreover, the usual luck of average ability. His mediocrity was the salvation of him. He excited no one's envy. It was not even suspected that he was rich till the peril of being rich was over, and all his intelligence was concentrated not on political, but on commercial speculations. Goriot was an authority second to none on all questions relating to corn, flour, and middlings, and the production, storage, and quality of grain. He could estimate the yield of the harvest and foresee market prices. He bought his cereals in Sicily and imported Russian wheat. Anyone who had heard him hold forth on the regulations that control the importation and exportation of grain, who had seen his grasp of the subject, his clear insight into the principles involved, his appreciation of weak points in the way that the system worked, would have thought that here was the stuff of which a minister is made. Patient, active, and persevering, energetic and prompt in action, he surveyed his business horizon with an eagle eye. Nothing there took him by surprise. He foresaw all things, knew all that was happening, and kept his own counsel. He was a diplomatist in his quick comprehension of a situation, and in the routine of business he was as patient and plodding as a soldier on the march. But beyond this business horizon he could not see. He used to spend his hours of leisure on the threshold of his shop, leaning against the framework of the door. Take him from his dark little counting-house, and he became once more the rough, slow-witted workman, a man who cannot understand a piece of reasoning, who is indifferent to all intellectual pleasures, and falls asleep at the play, a Parisian Dolibom, in short, against whose stupidity other minds are powerless. Natures of this kind are nearly all alike. In almost all of them you will find some hidden depth of sublime affection. Two all-absorbing affections filled the vermicelli maker's heart to the exclusion of every other feeling. Into them he seemed to put all the forces of his nature, as he put the whole power of his brain into the corn trade. He had regarded his wife, the only daughter of a rich farmer of La Brie, with a devout admiration. His love for her had been boundless. Goriot had felt the charm of a lovely and sensitive nature, which, in its delicate strength, was the very opposite of his own. Is there any instinct more deeply implanted in the heart of man than the pride of protection, a protection which is constantly exerted for a fragile and defenseless creature? Join love thereto, the warmth of gratitude that all generous souls feel for the source of their pleasures, and you have the explanation of many strange incongruities in human nature. After 7 years of unclouded happiness, Goriot lost his wife. It was very unfortunate for him. She was beginning to gain an ascendancy over him in other ways. Possibly she might have brought that barren soil under cultivation. She might have widened his ideas and given other directions to his thoughts. But when she was dead, the instinct of fatherhood developed in him till it almost became a mania. All the affection balked by death seemed to turn to his daughters, and he found full satisfaction for his heart in loving them. More or less brilliant proposals were made to him from time to time. Wealthy merchants or farmers with daughters vied with each other in offering inducements to him to marry again, but he determined to remain a widower. His father-in-law, the only man for whom he felt a decided friendship, gave out that Goriot had made a vow to be faithful to his wife's memory. The frequenters of the Corn Exchange, who could not comprehend this sublime piece of folly, joked about it among themselves, and found a ridiculous nickname for him. One of them ventured, after a glass over a bargain, to call him by it, and a blow from the vermicelli maker's fist sent him headlong into a gutter in the Rue Aublin. He could think of nothing else when his children were concerned. His love for them made him fidgety and anxious, and this was so well known that one day a competitor, who wished to get rid of him to secure the field to himself, told Goriot that Delphine had just been knocked down by a cab. The vermicelli maker turned ghastly pale, left the exchange at once, and did not return for several days afterwards. He was ill in consequence of the shock and the subsequent relief on discovering that it was a false alarm. This time, however, the offender did not escape with a bruised shoulder. At a critical moment in the man's affairs, Goriot drove him into bankruptcy and forced him to disappear from the Corn Exchange. As might have been expected, the two girls were spoiled. With an income of 60,000 francs, Goriot scarcely spent 1,200 on himself, and found all his happiness in satisfying the whims of the two girls. The best masters were engaged, that Anastasie and Delphine might be endowed with all the accomplishments which distinguish a good education. They had a chaperone. Luckily for them, she was a woman who had good sense and good taste. They learned to ride, they had a carriage for their use. They lived as the mistress of a rich old lord might live. They had only to express a wish, their father would hasten to give them their most extravagant desires, and asked nothing of them in return but a kiss. Goriot had raised the two girls to the level of the angels, and quite naturally he himself was left beneath them. Poor man, he loved them even for the pain that they gave him. When the girls were old enough to be married, they were left free to choose for themselves. Each had half her father's fortune as her dowry, and when the Comte de Restaud came to woo Anastasie for her beauty, her social aspirations led her to leave her father's house for a more exalted sphere. Delphine wished for money. She married Nucingen, a banker of German extraction, who became a baron of the Holy Roman Empire. Goriot remained a vermicelli maker, as before. His daughters and his sons-in-law began to demur. They did not like to see him still engaged in trade, though his whole life was bound up with his business. For 5 years he stood out against their entreaties. Then he yielded, and consented to retire on the amount realized by the sale of his business and the savings of the last few years. It was this capital that Madame Vauquer, in the early days of his residence with her, had calculated would bring in 8,000 or 10,000 livres in a year. He had taken refuge in her lodging-house, driven there by despair, when he knew that his daughters were compelled by their husbands not only to refuse to receive him as an inmate in their houses, but even to see him no more except in private. This was all the information which Rastignac gained from a Monsieur Muret, who had purchased Goriot's business, information which confirmed the Duchesse de Langeais' suppositions, and herewith the preliminary explanation of this obscure but terrible Parisian tragedy comes to an end. Towards the end of the first week in December, Rastignac received 2 letters, one from his mother and one from his eldest sister. His heart beat fast, half with happiness, half with fear, at the sight of the familiar handwriting. Those 2 little scraps of paper contained life or death for his hopes. But while he felt a shiver of dread as he remembered their dire poverty at home, he knew their love for him so well that he could not help fearing that he was draining their very life-blood. His mother's letter ran as follows: "My dear child, I am sending you the money that you asked for. Make a good use of it. Even to save your life, I could not raise so large a sum a second time without your father's knowledge, and there would be trouble about it. We should be obliged to mortgage the land. It is impossible to judge of the merits of schemes of which I am ignorant, but what sort of schemes can they be that you should fear to tell me about them? Volumes of explanation would not have been needed. We mothers can understand at a word, and that word would have spared me the anguish of uncertainty. I do not know how to hide the painful impression that your letter has made upon me, my dear son. What can you have felt when you were moved to send this chill of dread through my heart? It must have been very painful to you to write the letter that gave me so much pain as I read it. To what courses are you committed? You are going to appear to be something that you are not, and your whole life and success depends upon this? You are about to see a society into which you cannot enter without rushing into expense that you cannot afford, without losing precious time that is needed for your studies. Ah, my dear Eugène, believe your mother, crooked ways cannot lead to great ends. Patience and endurance are the 2 qualities most needed in your position. I am not scolding you. I do not want any tinge of bitterness to spoil our offering. I am only talking like a mother whose trust in you is as great as her foresight for you. You know the steps that you must take, and I, for my part, know the purity of heart and how good your intentions are. So I can say to you, without a doubt, go forward, beloved. If I tremble, it is because I am a mother, but my prayers and blessings will be with you at every step. Be very careful, dear boy. You must have a man's prudence, for it lies with you to shape the destinies of 5 others who are dear to you, and must look to you. Yes, our fortunes depend upon you, and your success is ours. We all pray to God to be with you in all that you do. Your Aunt Marcillac has been most generous beyond words in this matter. She saw at once how it was, even down to your gloves. "But I have a weakness for the eldest," she said gaily. "You must love your aunt very much, dear Eugene. I shall wait till you have succeeded before telling you all that she has done for you, or her money would burn your fingers. You who are young do not know what it is to part with something that is a piece of your past, but what would we not sacrifice for your sake? Your aunt says that I am to send you a kiss on the forehead from her, and that kiss is to bring you luck again and again, she says. She would have written you herself, the dear kind-hearted woman, but she is troubled with the gout in her fingers just now. Your father is very well. The vintage of 1819 has turned out better than we expected. Good-bye, dear boy. I will say nothing about your sisters, because Laure is writing to you, and I must let her have the pleasure of giving you all the home news. Heaven send that you may succeed. Oh, yes, dear Eugene, you must succeed. I have come, through you, to a knowledge of a pain so sharp that I do not think I could endure it a second time. I have come to know what it is to be poor and to long for money for my children's sake. There, good-bye. Do not leave us for long without news of you, and here, at the last, take a kiss from your mother." By the time Eugene had finished the letter, he was in tears. He thought of Father Goriot crushing his silver keepsake into a shapeless mass before he sold it to meet his daughter's bill of exchange. "Your mother has broken up her jewels for you," he said to himself. "Your aunt shed tears over those relics of hers before she sold them for your sake. What right have you to heap execrations on Anastasie? You have followed her example. You have selfishly sacrificed others to your own future, and she sacrifices her father to her lover. And of you two, which is the worse?" He was ready to renounce his attempts. He could not bear to take that money. The fires of remorse burned in his heart and gave him intolerable pain, the generous, secret remorse which men seldom take into account when they sit in judgment upon their fellow men. But perhaps the angels in heaven, beholding it, pardon the criminal whom our justice condemns. Rastignac opened his sister's letter. Its simplicity and kindness revived his heart. "Your letter came just at the right time, dear brother. Agathe and I had thought of so many different ways of spending our money that we did not know what to buy with it. And now you have come in, and, like the servant who upset all the watches that belonged to the King of Spain, you have restored harmony, for really and truly we did not know which of all the things we wanted most, and we were always quarreling about it, never thinking, dear Eugene, of a way of spending our money which would satisfy us completely. Agathe jumped for you. Indeed, we have been like two mad things all day, to such a prodigious degree, as aunt would say, that mother said with her severe expression, 'Whatever can be the matter with you, mesdemoiselles?' I think if we had been scolded a little, we should have been still better pleased. A woman ought to be very glad to suffer for one she loves. I, however, in my inmost soul, was doleful and cross in the midst of all my joy. I shall make a bad wife, I am afraid. I am too fond of spending. I had bought 2 sashes and a nice little stiletto for piercing eyelet holes in my stays, trifles that I really did not want, so that I have less than that slow coach Agathe, who is so economical and hoards her money like a magpie. She had 200 francs, and I have only 150. I am nicely punished. I could throw my sash down the well. It will be painful to me to wear it now. Poor dear, I have robbed you. And Agathe was so nice about it. She said, 'Let us send the 350 francs in our two names.' But I could not help telling you everything just as it happened. Do you know how we managed to keep your commandments? We took our glittering hoard, we went out for a walk, and when once fairly on the highway, we ran all the way to Ruffec, where we handed over the coin, without more ado, to Monsieur Guambert of the Messagerie Royale. We came back again like swallows on the wing. Don't you think that happiness has made us lighter?" Agathe said. "We said all sorts of things which I shall not tell you, Monsieur le Parisien, because they were all about you. Oh, we love you dearly, dear brother. It was all summed up in those few words. As for keeping the secret, little masqueraders like us are capable of anything, according to our aunt, even of holding our tongues. Our mother has been on a mysterious journey to Angoulême, and the aunt went with her, not without solemn councils from which we were shut out, and Monsieur le Baron likewise. They are silent as to the weighty political considerations that prompted their mission, and conjectures are rife in the state of Rastignac. The infants are embroidering a muslin robe with open work sprigs for Her Majesty the Queen. The work progresses in the most profound secrecy. There be but 2 more breadths to finish. A decree has gone forth that no wall shall be built on the side of Verteuil, but that a hedge shall be planted instead thereof. Our subjects may sustain some disappointment of fruit and espalier, but strangers will enjoy a fair prospect. Should the heir presumptive lack pocket handkerchiefs, be it known unto him that the Dowager Lady of Marcillac, exploring the recesses of her drawers and boxes, known respectively as Pompeii and Herculaneum, having brought to light a fair piece of cambric whereof she wotted not, the Princesses Agathe and Laure place at their brother's disposal their thread, their needles, and hands somewhat of the reddest. The 2 young princes, Don Henri and Don Gabriel, retain their fatal habits of stuffing themselves with grape jelly, of teasing their sisters, of taking their pleasure by going a bird nesting, and of cutting switches for themselves from the osier beds, maugre the laws of the realm. Moreover, they list not to learn naught, wherefore the papal nuncio, called of the commonalty Monsieur le Curé, threateneth them with excommunication, since that they neglect the sacred canons of grammatical construction for the construction of other cannon, deadly engines made of the stems of elder. Farewell, dear brother. Never did letter carry so many wishes for your success, so much love fully satisfied. You will have a great deal to tell us when you come home. You will tell me everything, won't you? I am the oldest. From something the aunt let fall, we think you must have had some success. Something was said of a lady, but nothing more was said. Of course not, in our family. Oh, by the by, Eugène, would you rather that we made that piece of cambric into shirts for you instead of pocket handkerchiefs? If you want some really nice shirts at once, we ought to lose no time in beginning upon them. And if the fashion is different now in Paris, send us one for a pattern. We want more particularly to know about the cuffs. Goodbye. Goodbye. Take my kiss on the left side of your forehead, on the temple that belongs to me and to no one else in the world. I am leaving the other side of the sheet for Agathe, who has solemnly promised not to read a word that I have written. But all the same, I mean to sit by her side while she writes, so as to be quite sure that she keeps her word. Your loving sister, Laure de Rastignac. Yes, said Eugène to himself. Yes, success at all costs now. Riches could not repay such devotion as this. I wish I could give them every sort of happiness. 1,550 francs, he went on after a pause. Every shot must go to the mark. Laura is right, trust a woman. I have only calico shirts. Where someone else's welfare is concerned, a young girl becomes as ingenious as a thief. guileless where she herself is in question, and full of foresight for me. She is like a heavenly angel forgiving the strange, incomprehensible sins of earth." The world lay before him. His tailor had been summoned and sounded, and had finally surrendered. When Rastignac met Monsieur de Trailles, he had seen at once how great a part the tailor plays in a young man's career. A tailor is either a deadly enemy or a staunch friend, with an invoice for a bond of friendship. Between these two extremes there is, alack, no middle term. In this representative of his craft, Eugene discovered a man who understood that his was a sort of paternal function for young men at their entrance into life, who regarded himself as a stepping stone between a young man's present and future. And Rastignac, in gratitude, made the man's fortune by an epigram of a kind in which he excelled at a later period of his life. "I have twice known a pair of trousers turned out by him make a match of 20,000 livres a year." End of chapter 8.